what do you see as the most significant opportunities and challenges facing AI over the next, let's say, 5, 10 years? And how do you incorporate these considerations into your investment decisions?
A lot of the generative AI products that we see today are quite impressive to demo, but they are not reliable. We know this, they're non-deterministic and non-reliable, and that's a problem that if we can solve, I don't know how, but if we can solve it, makes it way more effective.
Hello, welcome to AI50, where your data meets innovation. At AI50, we skillfully deploy cutting edge AI technology to create large language model apps tailored specifically for the needs and preferences of the 50 plus demographic. So, our mission is to harness the power of data and innovation to revolutionize the way this demographic interacts with technology. So, today's topic is shaping the future of AI investments. And we have an exceptional guest joining us today, Didi, who is the principal at Menlo Ventures and a founding member of Glean. His journey is nothing short of remarkable. As a leader in AI investments, Didi has been at the forefront of shaping the future of AI and enterprise technology. So his deep technical expertise and strategic vision have undoubtedly left an indelible mark in the industry. So, in a world where AI is rapidly transforming every aspect of our lives, Didi's insights are so invaluable. He's witnessed firsthand the power of AI in revolutionizing knowledge management through his work at Glean. And now, as an investor, he's helping to fuel the next generation of AI powered startups. So, Didi's story is one of passion, perseverance, and unrelenting pursuit of innovation. It's a testament to the incredible potential of AI and the visionary minds like Didi who are driving its progress. So, as we discuss and go into Didi's journey and explore the frontiers of AI investments, we know that you, our AI audience, will be captivated by his unique perspective and a wealth of knowledge he brings to the table. So get ready to be inspired, challenged, and enlightened by one of the sharpest minds in the industry. So, Didi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, so to start things off, could you share with us something about yourself that many people might not know? Or it could be a unique experience, a hidden talent, or an interesting fact that help us understand what has shaped your journey and perspective.
There's a couple. I think the one I think people ask about most often is because I grew up in multiple countries. I spent, age 3 to 10, I was in America. I was in the Bay Area because my family moved here. And then from 10 to 18, I grew up in India. I often get asked how that experience was like and how that's shaped me. But one of the funniest quirks of that experience is, and there's a bunch of people who do this as well, I tend to code switch accents. So I have two accents. And then when I'm talking to people in America or Americans, I would speak in this accent. But when I'm speaking to someone from India, I would speak in my Indian accent, which is a nice quirk of having literally grown up in both places.
Hmm. I can relate. I have an accent too, except I speak English with an accent, forgetting my S's and so forth. Well, that's exciting, and thank you. And I'm excited to learn more about your journey. Now, your career path has taken you from engineering to product management and now to venture capital. So, can you share with us what experiences or individuals have had the most significant impact on shaping your journey, let's say during your time at Glean and Menlo Ventures?
Yeah, of course. I think I wanted to actually start with somebody who shaped my journey at Google that also, and then I can talk about one person at Glean and Menlo as well, even though it's only been several months for me at Menlo. The person at Google that was most instrumental in shaping my journey was maybe my first manager. His name was Eyal. He's an Israeli guy. He rose very quickly in the organization. He was extremely talented. I still remember some anecdotes that he used to say, which is, I used to ask him, "Hey, how do you work so hard, and how are you so effective?" And he would say, "Man, Google is the easiest job I've ever had. You should have seen how hard my job was in the military when we were actually trying to save lives. I did that for 6 years. Search, that's kind of a low stakes
Mhm.
problem." And with that anecdote aside, what he used to really say that really inspired me is, at that time, I had a lot of doubts about whether I should be doing engineering long term. Like, what was this career going to look like for me, 10, 20, 30 years from now? And I asked him, like, hey, this product management thing is really hot. A lot of people seem to be doing it. And from a personality perspective, I think I'd be pretty good at it. Like, I enjoy talking to people. I like thinking about product and doing engineering. What should I do?
Mhm.
And his answer was really simple. He's like, most PMs can't do engineering. If you're an engineer who can do product, stay an engineer. Don't lose that
Mhm.
skill. That's a hard skill. You never want to let that go away. And that's some advice that really stuck with me because I was seriously considering switching at that point and I decided not to, which, served me really well because and then I'll tie this together, when I joined Glean, there's no way I could have got a job at a company which is 5 people at the time when I was interviewing, if I was in product. The only
Mhm.
hiring need was engineer. So that opportunity wouldn't have even worked. So when I joined Glean, then brings me to the next person who was really a big shaper of the way I think and my career. And that was the CEO and the founder, Arvind. Arvind is, obviously a tenured Valley veteran. He started Rubrik. He was one of the first distinguished engineers at Google, where he reported to Larry, where his title was to lead speed at Google. Very, very impressive guy. And then he started Glean. But if you speak to Arvind, he was just unlike anybody of power that I would think. He's such a simple man. And all he would say is, Didi, I don't do this for money. I do this because I love it. And
Mhm.
and I'd ask him questions like, hey, what do you do on weekends, Arvind? Like, how do you relax? And he would say, this is relaxing. I
Mhm.
build product. That's
Mhm.
what I like to do. And I just love that passion. He wouldn't spend on much. He lived very within his means. He just didn't care about the glitz and the glamour. He really cared about the job and was a very first principles thinker about execution. Anyway, lastly, I'll say at Menlo, even though it's been a very short period of time, one of the people who really inspires me at Menlo is somebody I work very closely with. His name is Tim Tully. He was used to be the ex CTO of a company called Splunk, which I think is $25 billion public company right now. And what I love about Tim is, Tim is about, pretty late in his career. He's in his late 40s, I'd imagine. And for somebody of that age, I just grew up thinking that people of that age are a certain way from like my parents, people like that. But Tim just has this glitz in his eyes. He just loves technology, and I see him, ask him what do you do for fun, and he's like, man, this new thing came out, and I just started coding on it. And he just has this like childlike curiosity, which I
Mhm.
can't emulate. I always say when I'm older, if I lose the childlike curiosity, it's game over.
Mhm.
That's sort of, those are really inspirational figures for me.
That is awesome. That's just wonderful to learn how those crucial moments and mentors have influenced your direction and inform your view in the industry. And now I like to know what your views are. People approaching 60, because that's where I'm at.
You
um,
don't look like you're approaching 40 even.
Because when you said, he's in his 40s, late in his career, I'm like, wow. To me, 40 is not nearly late, almost 60. And I feel like, you know, thriving for learning. I mean, nowadays with the advancement of AI, you gotta keep learning. You have to have an open mind, life learning attitude, and keeping up with the pace. It's challenging because every day is new. And well, an example of this Monday with the GPT 4.0 release and how that's transformed multimodal and so forth. And to be honest, I'm still kind of, I don't know, in Candyland, just hearing all these advancements and so excited for it. So, yeah. Okay. Well, as a leader, We often face challenging decisions that can have far reaching consequences. Can you share a story about a difficult choice you had to make while leading the development of Glean or investing in AI? And what lessons you took away from that experience?
I think the most, maybe this is a cop out answer, but it's a recurring series of challenging decisions, which all are pretty similar, in my opinion. What I've observed at Glean is what's happened in at least some part of the tech industry is if you look at these big tech companies, like, I mean, especially Google and Facebook, because I work there, I don't know as much about Microsoft and Amazon as deeply. But Google and Facebook, for a very long period of time, became a money printing machine.
Mm,
And because of that, a lot of the talent that grew their careers have become quite senior, have become quote unquote experts in their field. In my opinion, many of them haven't actually driven anything. They have sort of ridden the wave, which would have gone up anyway, and did incremental work that isn't really that challenging. And in that culture, what was promoted was really an attitude of just being nice.
mhm,
If you were to succeed at Google and Facebook, I think like the biggest way to succeed is just making everyone happy around you. Don't
mhm.
don't rock the boat. This is what they
Yeah.
would say a lot at Google. If you don't rock the boat, everything's going well. Metrics will move 1-2% every year. That's all you need to do. Don't
Mhm.
upset people. At a startup, that just doesn't work.
No,
You can't
different
like
mindset.
it's a very different mindset.
Mhm,
And what I realized is, while we were building Glean as Assistant or Glean in general, is you just need this idea of radical candor when
mhm,
you're making decisions, and you have to remove ego from the process.
mhm,
And that's not something that, even initially I found that a little bit challenging, but there were a lot of hard decisions you had to make, even for people and colleagues that you work with that you really like, where you just have to be honest and sometimes say, you know what, like, I like you, but to make the correct decision, I cannot take the average of the five ideas of the colleagues I like. I need
mhm.
to, we all need to figure out what is the best thing and what works. And you have to put your ego aside to make those decisions. So there were multiple small decisions, on a weekly basis where you really needed to dig deep. And it's really hard to do in practice, where in a meeting, you're sort of zoning out, like multiple people are talking, you're context switching, someone brings up something that they're doing, and you don't want to go like, hey, early morning, that idea, let's not do that. That's a
Mhm.
bad idea. It's a waste of time. We're going to go the wrong direction. You have to be there, always on, always being somewhat confrontational,
Yeah.
honestly, in order to make that product succeed and to make the good decisions to make it succeed. And a lot of that I also learned in more it was sort of driven into me when I was working at Google Israel, because I feel like Israelis just have that culture of, they always tell you they're very straightforward and candid,
Mhm.
and without being personal about things. So I really learned how to do that there, and that sort of drove me to, those are the kind of decisions you have to make at Glean in order to
Yeah.
make the product succeed.
Mhm. And, to add to that with a startup, the mindset is innovate, disrupt, incorporate a place like Google. It's conformance, not to rock the boat. So they're completely in misalignment. But it's
Absolutely.
it's wonderful to have folks like you that experience both and are very understanding and adaptive. So that's great. And I appreciate hearing the stories, the journey, and it shows how dealing with complicated choices and the role that you were in and the insights that you gain improves leadership and investment skills, which we'll get to next. So that's great. Now, the AI and infrastructure sectors constantly evolving with new breakthroughs and trends emerging at rapid pace. So how do you stay on top of these developments and how do you leverage the knowledge in your role as principal at Menlo Ventures?
I think every investor has a different way of doing this. Most investors are not technical, and one of the reasons Menlo hired me is because I think they realized that actually having, especially in this era of technology, understanding technology is pretty critical to making good investments. we see all the time how there's so many unicorn companies that sort of collapse, and a lot of people are left wondering, okay, how did this company get to a billion plus valuation if it can just collapse the next day? I thought a billion plus meant it was doing something. And when you dig into it, you realize there's multiple reasons, and that's a whole topic. But a big part of that reason is people are investing on credentials. They're not
Mhm.
investing on technology because they oftentimes don't understand the technology. So if you
Yeah.
look like you're a published person on Google Scholar, you worked at DeepMind, you went to Stanford for your PhD, you're probably going to raise a lot of money whether or not you're doing something meaningful. So anyway, long-winded road to say, how do I stay on top of these things? They're pretty simple stuff. Every day I enjoy it. So I think that's really key to it. But every day I'll do at least an hour or two of just reading on Hacker News, Tech Meme are some of the common ones I go to. I spend a lot of time on Twitter reading, but you
Mhm.
need to curate Twitter for you to get real value out of it. And then the most valuable thing for me, the two other valuable things for me, I should say, is one is you I've noticed in startup world, there's such a dissonance today between what people are saying and what the actual thing does.
Mm.
And so actually playing with something often gives you, even running, even let's say GPT-4o, running 5 different queries on GPT-4o will tell you way more than reading 100 tweets about it. Because all of those 100 tweets are going to say the same thing. They're going to
Mhm.
take the announcement, they're going to be like, wow, this is the future, this is amazing. And you're not actually going to know what really changed.
Right.
So that's one. And the second one is, I think a lot of investors do this, and we have to, is you have to keep talking to other industry experts who have a different vantage point. And I don't think of experts as necessarily, hey, 20 years of experience, senior director at, no, I mean, you can talk to people with 25 years, who are 25 years old, and they will tell you so much more about a company
Mhm.
because they're close to the metal. And just talking to them and understanding, hey, how are you thinking about things? Why do you think this? And probing also really helps shape your vision. You need to hear multiple different views on things for you to understand what is actually closest to the truth.
Mhm. Being close to the consumers, the ultimate users, right? And truly solving pain points and looking at it from their perspective rather than just being product focused. I think I
I
see
have
that
a story
often.
actually. I
What's
can.
that?
I love that you mentioned that. I have a story, the recent story that I can share with you
Sure.
about that. Like we're in a little Silicon Valley bubble, and everyone's always talking about the same things and AI and tech and all this stuff. It's great. I recently was with a friend of mine. And I was telling him how crazy I was about all this stuff coming out, and it's sort of like, half of the stuff you said I don't even know what it is. Can you show me? And so we sat on a couch and we watched a bunch of YouTube, a bunch of videos, and it was so interesting to me to see that I was drawn to the videos that were technically interesting to me. These are demo videos like OpenAI,
Mhm.
Google, whatever, UDO. There's a bunch of AI tools, and the ones that he was drawn to were so different. And that sort of made me realize, like, yeah, consumers, as you said, users think very different from
Mhm.
people who are always, in the metal, and we're going to be influenced by what people think about the technology more than your actual consumer. So it's that's another thing that you have to be wary about.
Mhm. I agree. I tell my team is that we're not in the business of producing products. We're in the business of solving problems for the demographic 50 plus. I don't care how old you are, but when you're working on this, you have to wear that hat, 50 plus. That
Mhm.
is where you are, and it's so important because to understand and to come up with products that are usable in that demographic, it's not just product focus. You really have to understand their behaviors, their where they shine, where they decline, right? There's cognition, there's visibility, there's ability to understand the instructions. There's so many nuances. So it's very important to be consumer focused rather than product focused. And, we can't explain enough, right? That's a huge topic in itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So building high performance team is very important for success of any organization, especially in a fast paced world of startups and venture capital. So, what strategies have you found to be most effective in assembling and leading exceptional teams? Glean or Menlo?
There's a couple that I want to talk about. One is, and this is something I learned from Glean and from Arvind. When you're building a team from scratch and you don't have a brand associated with it, there's an element of you cannot apply the same hiring principles as a corporate would. Their needs are very different. When you're building a team, there's a snowball effect of reputation. So the first people that you hire not only have to either be extremely exceptional at what they do, but also they have to be almost, I would say, inspirational or a connector in their network. I'll give you one example. We could have hired one of 50, say, new grads from Berkeley when we started hiring new grads. But Arvind had a very interesting insight. He's like, you always want to hire the TAs from the most popular classes.
Hmm.
Because if you hire that TA, next year you get 20 more people who want to work at your company because they follow what he does, because
Right.
they look up to him. And instead, if you hire the best person in the class who's just not well known, great, you got one good person, but the next year
Exactly.
you might not get 20 more people banging on your door. So that's one. The second thing is a bit more I would say strategic about how you pitch what you're trying to hire for. And when we were hiring at Glean, there's some strategies that just don't work. One thing is you never start with comp. When you start talking about how much you get paid, you're hiring the wrong kind of person,
Yeah.
or you're hiring even the right person gets distracted by that and
Hmm.
starts making bad decisions. Then they
Right.
start thinking, oh, but they're not paying me. Oh, but I should get paid more. That's not the mindset you want. That conversation comes after they develop conviction in what you're trying to do. So the
Exactly.
first order of business is you need them to buy into what the vision of what you're trying to build is. And you need to be on second thing is you need to be very honest with them. At Glean, I was always very honest about, hey, you want to work, you want to have good work-life balance at this job, you're just probably not going to get it. And I don't know how to say it. You can make it work. Not everyone at Glean works like 80 hours a week or anything. There's people who work 40, 50 hours a week. They're very intense for that 40 hours that they work. But let's just say it's not going to be an easy job. And if you want an easy job, frankly, I'll be upfront. Like, you should go somewhere else.
Hmm.
And that in itself it's funny because not only does it select for people who actually care about the other stuff that you're looking for, but even the people who might want work life balance are sort of, they feel threatened and they're like, no, I can do it. I feel like that's a challenge that I can take. And so they lean in even more. They actually appreciate that candor instead of you trying to dance around it and say, hey, you're going to get work life balance and you're going to
Yeah.
build awesome stuff and you're going to, you're not going to get all of those things. So
Yeah.
those are some tactics that I found that are quite useful.
Yeah, and I think to start out with, I think it's wonderful if you can have that honest conversation with full conviction of your values and your goals, so that they are aligned. It's easier to know upfront when they're not aligned, as opposed to finding out 6 months into it, right?
Mhm.
So I feel that that's some fundamental in hiring and keeping a team. And I want to add back to the TA example that you cited. That's exactly what I told my son. He's computer engineering at Michigan, who graduated now, is working at Microsoft. When we had that COVID situation, everybody is going to class behind a screen. He was wondering, what can I do, right? I mean, we don't go anywhere, we don't do anything. So he applied to be a TA, and he loved it. He never realized that the value and the fun, well, it was during COVID, right? You have to do the best that you can behind a screen, but he loved it. He learned so much. And then the point that you made about the networking and so forth. So he's over at Microsoft now, and the people that he helped proctor classes want to do the same thing. So now the company that he's with open up for multiple qualified students. So it's true. It's so true. So great advice.
Exactly. Yeah, it worked like a charm.
Yeah. So, in the world of technology and investing, pivots and adaptation is so important to stay ahead. So, can you discuss a time when you had to shift your approach to a project or investment? Um, like you mentioned unstructured, pine cone, or anthropic, and what insights you gained from that experience?
Let me talk about the Glean example first because I have more knowledge of that. In late 2022, we were at a pretty critical juncture at Glean where large language models were clearly powerful and extremely interesting and cool. And they went very far to solve the mission sort of that Glean was going after, which is to organize. It's Google's mission, but for work. So to organize all your information at work and give it to you when you want it. At that time, because a lot of our leadership was ex Google search people, when you present them with this alternate view of the world, their first knee jerk reaction is, as expected, we've been working on search for 20 years. And if you gave me a penny for every time I heard this new technology will disrupt search, I would have a lot of money.
Hmm.
And so when they came to this idea of LLMs, the first reaction was, yeah, I don't know about this. Like, it's cool, but we're doing search. This is just not our business. And I think that was a moment where it was interesting. It's an interesting time, it was an interesting time for me and some other people at the company because not only do you have to deep within yourself and find your own conviction in order to fight this battle, because you're like, yo, these guys are probably right. Like they've been working at Google they built search. So they're not dumb. And so you first have to dig deep for your own conviction, and then you have to strategically make sure you can convince them. And
Hmm.
it was a challenge. It took about a month, maybe more, of many people and many examples and demos and building stuff and demonstrating what it could do before it sort of was greenlit by the company as, hey, we should do this next product. And looking back on it now the product is, a significant part of Glean's revenue, and it was one of the best decisions that they could have made. But it wouldn't have happened if you're not constantly willing to fight the fight and willing to question things at the right moment. At Menlo, similar. I've only been a part of some of these, and they say it all the time. Menlo's existed for 48 years. It's one of the oldest venture firms in the Valley. It's running on its 16th fund right now. Most venture funds, I think the data says that 65% of venture funds never return capital. So if you've done it 16 times, you've clearly done something right.
Hmm.
Um, when you do it for that long in venture, this is advice coming from people who've done this for 20 plus years. And I'm just telling you what they tell me is you always have to reinvent yourself. If you're not reinventing yourself, you're not ahead of the curve. If you're not thinking deeply about, hey, what am I doing differently that the industry isn't, then you're just going to follow whatever everybody else is doing. You have no actual alpha on the industry. So we constantly think about our approach, whether it's the kind of checks we write, the volume of checks we write, the size of checks, the kind of companies we invest in, what stage we want to invest in. All of that stuff you constantly have to think about and say, can we do better here? Can we do something more interesting here? And the Anthropic example is such a good example of that, which is such a non-traditional deal for Menlo to do. And it was, an SPV structure into Anthropic that did a huge round that is keeping it running now. So I think that's an example of innovation is everywhere.
That's very exciting. And, balancing risk and practical consideration is an ongoing challenge. Now, how do you approach with balance when investing in or developing cutting edge technologies?
It's different for when you're operating and versus when you're investing. Um, when you're operating, I think risk mitigation is, you know, it's it's a little bit easier, I think, because it's resource constrained half the time. Um, you when you're operating a business or a startup, especially at small scale, you want to remain focused. You also want to try something new. The philosophy we always had was sort of 70-20-10, which is 70% is the core work, 20% is some new work that and 10% is completely experimental stuff. I think that framework broadly generally works, and that already balances out the risks. It balances out the risks because you're only focusing on one thing at a time, and that is what you need to do. So that's how it works when you're operating a startup. You can't really, and then as you do that focus, the way you balance out different kinds of risk is more strategic. And you'd have to get into the details, like how do you solve for market risk? How do you solve for tech risk? How do you solve for all these other types of risk in the business? And you need to, as a startup, just slowly eliminate all of this risk so you can make something successful. As an investor, it's a little bit different. Um, Managing risk involves, number one, understanding the reward, which means doing diligence and really understanding a space as best as you can. It's going to be imperfect. Talking to people, talking to experts, really diving deep into the numbers and the technology. And so you need to understand the risk, the reward, to understand how the risk plays into it. But unfortunately, the hardest part of investing is you don't control, the risk is completely dependent on how much you pay. Like if you pay less, then there's no risk. So, but the price is completely dictated by the market.
Hmm.
So if the market is frothy and people are overpaying for stuff, it's a tough place to be, because what are your options? You can sit out of every single deal because people are overpaying, but then you're not doing your job. Or you can participate and overpay, but that price is just not dictated by you. So all you can do is say, maybe I have an asymmetric or a different view of the reward. So I think the overpaid price is okay, but that's about it. I think that's what makes it harder. You have much less control as an investor than you do as a startup founder. Because as a startup founder, you can kind of stir that ship in a lot of different ways. As an investor, you're kind of at the behest of the market many times.
Hmm. Hmm. Great insight. So, now, what do you see as the most significant opportunities and challenges facing AI over the next, let's say, 5, 10 years? And how do you incorporate these considerations into your investment decisions?
There's several. I'll start with, a lot of the generative AI products that we see today are quite impressive to demo, but they are not reliable. So we know this, they're non-deterministic and non-reliable, and that's a problem that if we can solve, I don't know how, but if we can solve it, makes it way more effective. Number two is, I think, in this sort of hype cycle or a frothy cycle, there is a lot of people building with AI tools that are not focusing on product from first principles. As a result, a lot of products that we see have really poor retention. And they might be nice and hot right now, but who knows whether people will continue to use those products in 6 months unless you fundamentally think about first principles. How do I build a good product? And that does nothing to do with AI. That has basic product principle building. That's number two. Number three, I think, is we are at a point where so much of the next generation of the power of what AI can do is bound by compute. When you're bound by compute, there's only a couple of different options you have. Either you can make chips better and more efficient and more throughput faster, and that takes time, or you can figure out ways to make the underlying algorithms more efficient. Now, historically, if you look at it, typically it's been the latter. Sometimes there's innovations in algorithms, but almost always, like the innovation is driven subtly through increase in computation. AlphaGo is an example. When they solved Go, yeah, the technique was really cool, but you couldn't have even done that 20 years ago. You just would not have the computational power to do that 20 years ago. So that's the third. I think about that a lot. And fourth is less about the macro industry, more about like specific investing, which is a lot of people have great ideas, but they don't think that, or they don't think that much about how they're right to win in a market. And I always like to say, I love ideas that are unsexy, because if you're trying to work on something that's a really sexy idea, you have to also convince me that you, a small startup with three people, are working on something that Google and Facebook and OpenAI and all these companies are not working on.
Hmm.
So that's a challenging question. And it's not like you're building a product, you're building a technology. And these guys have talent, they have money, they have
Hmm.
GPUs. What are you going to build that they can't build? What is your core insight that they're not going to do already? So those are a couple of things that I think about when I'm thinking about my investing thesis. And a lot of the companies I end up really liking are companies that, look, they have a pretty strong play in AI as a startup, but their underlying technology is actually way more broad than that. And if by chance AI stops being important or stops being as hot or it's captured by other players, I think the risk is generally mitigated because these guys can do so many other things. So a lot of focus on that sort of strategic thinking, but ultimately I think the biggest advice is team. As an investor, the most important thing at early stage is team. There are just some people who can, as they say, like run through walls, hire great people, and for them, it's almost unimportant what they're working on. They usually succeed no matter what.
Hmm. Let me ask you about the team dynamic and hiring people. With this AI ecosystem and agents, okay, how many people? I guess the question is, what impact do you think that will have in the workforce? Let's say we used to think about 5, 10 people, startups, and so forth. How many people do you think we really need now with the ability to create AI agents?
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of functions I genuinely think are getting automated. And that doesn't mean people lose their jobs overnight.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes it doesn't mean anyone loses their job. If the company can afford the people, then you're just getting more work out of the same people.
Hmm.
But how does that change what we do? Let me just be specific on certain things that I've seen, and TBD how this all plays out. But for sales and outbounding, there are tools that completely replace that of varying quality. Some of them do it really, really well, where they pick your ideal customer profile, the kind of target persona you want to reach out to, and then they will handle emailing them, responses, everything to when the meeting is on your calendar at whatever time you have.
Hmm.
That is a huge time saver. There's a similar sort of tool for recruiting. You can do the same thing for recruiting candidates, get them in the door. No need to send emails anymore. There's a lot of work going on when it comes to doing engineering. So tons of coding agents of various forms that can do interesting things. Like there's some variants of coding agents which is like, just put this in your GitHub repository and we will automatically find issues and we'll go and fix them for you. And
Hmm.
that's just work you wouldn't have even thought of. So that's like a different kind of extension. And then, of course, there's Copilot tools where you're trying to develop, and as you're developing, it sort of helps you write code,
Hmm.
helps you review code, helps you test code, various forms of that. There are even voice outbounding tools or survey tools that help do that better. Tons and tons of summarization tools which help you take a lot of information and put it and make it really, really digestible and easy to digest. Glean, obviously I'm biased, but I think that is a huge one because even at Glean, we would sort of get jaded when you work at a company for a long time and you forget how cool the product you've built is because you're always in it. And we had a customer one time tell us, you just don't understand that most of my job as a senior person was being in these Slack channels and answering the same questions day in and day out. People ask me the same stuff. Big company, hey, what do I do here? How do I fix this? How do I do that? And I would always be redirecting them to a wiki and telling them, hey, look at this answer. And I'd feel like a bad person for doing it because I wasn't just giving them the answer. And then when Glean showed up and Glean Assistant showed up, we would literally deploy these bots in a bunch of Slack channels, say for HR or IT or even generic stuff. And he's like, my job is 80% lighter. I just
Hmm.
don't have to do that anymore. It goes, it searches through the information and it tells them the answer without me having to do anything. There's completely autonomous. So I think there's a lot of power in what these things can bring. And I think it's incremental. So we're not going to see a change overnight. But yeah, I mean, it's already true that there are businesses of 10 people, 15 people who can make hundreds and millions of dollars and operate efficiently, which is not really possible like 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's true. So these AI agents augments your workflow, but it's like a GPS. It still needs a driver, and that's you.
Yes and no. I think there comes a time when it can work autonomously. I don't think we're necessarily there yet for each task. I mean, take the
Hmm.
outbounding tool too. Like, yeah, you have to drive it and say, hey, these are the kind of people I'm interested in. But once you do that,
Yeah.
then for the next month, 2 months, you don't really have to do anything. You just have to take the meeting. And so
Right.
that's almost fully automated. So yeah, they need some driver because you need to give it some direction, but
Mhm.
very little sometimes.
Mhm. That's great. You mentioned earlier about, I think it was, topic 1 or point 1 that you were making about the products are not, reliable or sustainable. What do you think that's due? Due to what?
Oh, well, that's just due to the inherent way that large language models work. There's a lot of interesting research work on this, which is by design, it is trained on a large set of data and it is meant to be probabilistic in nature when it generates new text. And because of that probabilistic nature, it sort of imitates um, I guess the core of the question is if it didn't have that probabilistic nature, it would also be less useful for many tasks. So if you tuned it to hard determinism, you would lose all the creativity. And
Mm.
it's very difficult to understand what kind of tasks are creativity focused tasks and what kind of tasks aren't. It's not a clean line. There's tasks where you answer a question and based on how it reads the information, there's a little bit of creativity, quote unquote, involved in understanding what the answer is, and determinism won't work there. But there are other tasks where you really want it to always work the same exact way every single time. And I think that's the sort of trade-off in large language
Mhm.
models, which is hard for just on a technical level to get at.
Mhm. Very
There's
true.
ways you can induce it as well, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Mhm. Well, that's great. So as AI continues to advance and become more integrated into our daily lives and businesses, an issue comes up is ethical consideration, which is so crucial. So, what specific ethical challenges did you encounter at some point or anticipate facing in AI development and deployment? And how do you, let's say, contemplate and navigating these complexities as a tech leader?
They're tough. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll give you a list of ethical considerations that are just really tough to wrestle with. One of them is you're training on all this people's work. Maybe that's legal, maybe that's not. In some domains, it definitely is not. In some domains, it is, but you can't prove it. So,
Hmm.
what does that mean for how law works in this case?
Hmm.
Artists are very annoyed at this when it comes to music generation. Artists are annoyed when it comes to image generation. Text, I think, less annoyed, but for books and stuff, it's very clear that these large language models train on books. You can kind of trivially figure that out, but again, you just can't pinpoint and say you definitely train on copyright material. So that's an ethical consideration, and that I don't know how to navigate. Frankly, here's another one. The second thing is, say this is a minutia of things, but OpenAI released this amazing voice feature with 4.0. Once that API releases, a lot of people are going to be using that voice feature to make phone calls to other people.
Yeah.
And I think by law, if I'm not wrong, it is not legal to make a phone call with an AI without disclosing that you are actually an AI. But we know that everyone's not going to follow that. It's not really going to be cut down on, and ethically that's pretty wrong and you can't do it. Similar considerations on recording tools. There's a whole suite of hardware stuff that just kind of always on recording. Not all of them ask for consent of every single user or every single person in the room. That's an ethical consideration.
You mean
Lastly,
transcription?
yeah,
Transcription? Yeah. That's true.
and the last one I think is the one I think it's a borderline ethical, but it's also an ecosystem consideration. And let me put it this way: the reason I sometimes care less about the ethical considerations because I feel helpless. I'm like, what am I going to do? This is just the way it is. I'm not in a position where I'm a regulator or I'm a law enforcer where I can make a difference here. I'm investing in the space. Like that's just not something I can really focus on. If it's something egregiously wrong, we're not going to invest in it, but I can't fix bad actors. So
Hmm.
that's why I think about it less. The one I think about a lot is the ecosystem dynamic, that what happens to the ecosystem with these AI tools. And what I mean by that is the web ecosystem used because there was a feedback loop. You would create a website, people would go search, they'd find your website, you'd get paid some ad revenue. and you have incentive to create more websites. There's more people will create more websites, and the ecosystem is nice and flourishing and always has content, and people can find content, and Google can make money. Everyone's happy. Now with Gen AI, because it's trained on content up to a certain point in time and then just shown to you, the people who are making the content just don't get paid out. When the people don't get paid out, there's dying incentive for anyone to contribute anything of value. We see this in journalism already, like, right? No one in journalism, everyone just writes clickbaity articles because no one will read the actual other stuff. So what does that mean for all of the content in the next 10 years? Like, who writes that? What
Yeah.
is all of the information, all the news, all the stuff we want to know about the world? Who's going to write that? Why do they have any economic incentive to do that? That's a huge question. And that's kind of a more existential question. And people have answers that I think are just not great. Like, some people say, oh, people will just, I don't know, tweet about it, or post about it. But no, they're not going to post about what's happening in, a war in Mongolia. That's a journalist's job. They have no incentive and no economic incentive to do that, because no one's going to get pay them for their work. And some AI is going to train on it and spit it out. That's a problem for the ecosystem. So that's one I really, really worry about. But yeah, there are plenty of ethical considerations.
Yeah. You know, great power comes great responsibilities, right? And it's not always a clean cut. But I guess just like anything, you embrace it with caution.
Yep. I mean, what are the options you have?
Yeah. So even some of the most successful leaders face setbacks and failures. So can you share an example of a significant challenge that you encounter, and I guess how did you overcome that, and what lesson did you take away from that experience?
I would say one of the most significant challenges in my career was at the later stage of Google, where I had um, a boss that was frankly just bad. He was egotistical, power hungry, less concerned about solving the problems and driving the product. He was more concerned about control. So naturally, this led to some tension, and I can't say I walked away from that with some amazing revelation about how I should deal with conflict, but what I can say is I I realized at that point, I was going through some tougher times at that point. I was talking to a lot of friends and people. I realized the most liberating thing is to not care. You have principles, you have values, you have what drives you. And I think what really drove it home for me was when I was talking to, a mentor of mine, and they said, "What's the worst that can happen? He'll fire you. Are you going to be really that sad if you were fired for standing up for your values?" No. I'm like, no, I'm not going to be sad at all. In fact, I will be sad if I stay
Yeah.
and don't stand up for my values, because then I'm like,
Mhm.
what am I doing?
Right.
So I think what I'd say is, what I took away from that is, you should know when to fight the fight.
Hmm.
Not always. You're not always sometimes people disagree. Most of the time you're probably trying to make sure everything is nice and happy and people are under control. But when there's a time when your values are come into question and the way you operate come into question, yeah, you need to fight the fight, because you will feel much worse if you don't. And then what are
Hmm.
you if you're not standing up for the things that you believe in? So I think that's what I took away from that hard time.
Yeah, and it's so true as you navigate in the later years, whether it's professional or personal, we all develop that core of conduct. It's that solid rock that over the years of experience that have formed and shaped and where you are right now, and it's your core of conduct, and that does not deviate, so I agree with you. That's so important. So now, I'm sure there have been many difficult decisions that you made that are against popular opinion, aside from your ex-boss from Google. So can you share with us a situation where you face this challenge, whether it's Glean, Menlo, or any other um, positions, and how did you navigate it, and what you do to overcome that?
Multiple times. I mean, I think the hardest time is, I think some of it is personality dependent. Sometimes I'm generally a more of a debater persona, so I generally don't hesitate to express my opinion if I disagree. I think there's an art to it. Like you don't disagree and then attack the person. You disagree and try to arrive at a solution together. Can't say I'm perfect at that, but I try to do that at most times. The hardest times I think are when you disagree with someone you respect immensely and you're like,
Mhm.
this guy has every right to be right. Like he's done this longer than I have. He knows more than I do, but I just don't buy it. Like I just don't understand what he's trying to say. And I think in those situations, what I try to do is it's really I guess not that fascinating advice is you have to lead with respect. So
Mhm.
my view is if you know the person has way more power or and you respect the person, it's not even about power. It's that person, if you respect the person and he has more control over this and more experience, then your first approach has to be, look, I may be wrong, but I'm telling you this because this is what I feel. At the
Mhm.
end, if you disagree with me, your opinion goes. And I always lead with that. I'm like, look, your opinion goes at the end. I'm just telling you what I think and why, but your opinion goes. And here's why I think what I think. So let's talk about that. Here's what the evidence I have. Here's the data I have. Here's as much. Do the research, like do the work. Nobody likes to be, a lot of these people are busy and they don't have the time for you, honestly, a lot of the time. So when you are going to disagree with them on something, do the research, do the work, bring it up, and then it comes to a point where they actually respect you for that. And they're
Mhm.
like, I'm really glad. I get this all the time where a lot of people are like, you know what? This is why we hired you, man. Like you disagree. And I think you have a
Yeah.
fair point. And so that's I try to nurture that a lot. And there's a healthy balance. Again, you have to know when to disagree. You can't disagree every day. Then you just become a disagreeable person. You
Yeah.
know this is a battle I don't care about. This is one I do care about. And then you say the ones I care about, I'm going to express.
That's great. Communicate so that the two lines, stay open, right? Because it's based on respect.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
And in
So now
addition, I'll say I also really believe strongly in bonding. Like the
Mhm.
fundamental reason why people get into conflict is because they don't know each other outside of work.
Yeah.
And so you need a little bit of that bonding. You need to know, like, hey, where is this person coming from in life to really understand, have empathy when you're dealing with them. And then you're like, okay, I get it. Look, we disagree, but I still think you're awesome. Like,
I agree with that. And I think it's unfortunate sometimes, at least just me, I don't see it enough where people invest in the time to understand the story behind it because everybody has a situation. Everybody has, whether it's a bad day, bad scenario, whatever they come to you, that perhaps um, that you are in alignment. It could be in the actual scope, the topic, personality, or just the history and the luggage that they come with. And it takes, like you say, time to invest, to explore, to understand with empathy. And maybe it's me. I don't see enough of it. Do you?
I don't. And
Yeah.
I like this quote that one of my friends always tells me is like, everyone has a struggle that you don't see.
Exactly.
And they're not going to tell you about it sometimes, but just leading with knowing that everyone has their stuff just
hmm
makes you a little bit nicer.
Yeah, I agree. So now, for those just starting out in their tech industry, what advice would you offer based on your experiences as an engineer, manager, and a venture capital principal?
I would say don't be too swayed by what's the hot thing right now. So learn it, know it, but know that like things come in waves, and your incremental alpha is knowing something that other people don't, not knowing something like 100 people do. So focus on your curiosity first. I would say learn how to love the craft and always stick to that guiding principle because work doesn't become work when you just love the craft. So
hmm
those two things I advise. And then the third thing I would say is, those are easy things to say, but in reality, everyone has to recruit and get a job and do all these things. Generally, I would say that don't be idealistic about how a career works. And I see a lot of this. I see a lot of people who say things like, "Hey, you don't need to go to college to get a job," and they're right. Like, you don't. But I mean, you also don't need to. there's a lot of things you don't need to do to get somewhere, but they help, and they help a
Mhm.
lot. And I think what's more important to me is I like to tell, especially like my brother is in college right now. Like I like to tell my brother and kids that I advise. I'm like, hey man, like look, it's great to be idealistic. It's great to be curious. It's great to lean into what you like, and you should always do that. But then always have your reality hat on, which is this is just how it works,
Mhm.
and don't lie to yourself about how things work. Like I'll give you an example. Like people lie to themselves all the time. Stanford, if you go to Stanford, you are going to get have it easier to get a job and to start a company. That's just how the world works. I think most people know that, but very once in a while they're like, "Oh, actually it doesn't matter. I can go to, Cornell and I can do the same." You can do the same. But be honest, Stanford helps. And I think having that reality check and knowing this is just how things work right now, and this is how I like to operate, that in itself will go a really long way in your career.
Very true. Many years ago, when my kids were in college, they all graduated now. I always advise them the branded schools, always nice. Is it mandatory? Well, I think what matters more is that what you do with what you know, as opposed to a branded school and just bank on that, you know. And to me, knowledge, your thrive, your execution, your heart, your conviction, and a branded school is always nice. So, no, those are great advice. So, thank you. So now we're getting to the end. Another question.
Mm.
So, as a decision maker, our personal philosophies and values often guide our choices. So, what core principles have you or have shaped your approach to your roles at startups and your as a principal at Menlo Ventures?
The values that really matter to me, I've thought about this a lot in my just general in my life, is there's both personal and professional. I don't think they're different values, and there's two. There's only two. The other ones are like common, everyone has those, but the two that matter
Mhm.
most to me are humility, which I think
Mhm.
no matter where you are, what you do, what you achieve, you need to be humble, like you haven't done it all, because every next battle is a separate battle. And you don't have any right to win that one unless you're humble. The second one is curiosity. I just think that, for me, that's like why I do whatever I do. I don't seek any title, or I don't really care about money and status, and I don't have like very rich, like expensive hobbies. What I really care is like I'm a curious person. I like to read and learn about things, and as much as I can, make an impact in the way that I can. So I think humility and curiosity will always be sort of my core driving values, and everything else comes from that. So yeah, you have like the honesty, and you have like be disciplined and be hardworking and put in the effort. All of these things come from that, but I think that's my core, and I
Mhm.
maintain that sort of throughout.
That's wonderful. So we're at the end now, and I appreciate your time so much. Would you like to add anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think the only thing I'd like to say is when it comes to like the advice question got me thinking is when it comes to approaching a new thing, an industry or whatever, trust your gut. Trust your gut. What do you think that's different from other people, and follow that. And I can give you so many examples of people who have just trusted their gut long enough, and those are the ones who are the most tremendously successful. Everyone else told them, don't do that, that's a stupid decision, why are you starting this company, why are you spending all your time
Mhm.
in this dumb project that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Just trust your gut. Like
Mhm.
that's fine. And I don't believe in this, oh, all your friends, if your friends are haters, then they're not your friends. No, sometimes your friends will be like that, sometimes I'm like that, people are like that. But
And
it's
that's
your
okay,
job.
right?
That's
And that's
okay.
okay. Yeah.
It's your job to be like, I hear you, but no,
Mhm.
I'm going to do it anyway. And that's, I think, how most people should have the confidence to just trust their gut on things.
Mhm. Well, I want to thank Didi for joining us today and sharing his incredible insights and experiences from the world of AI and infrastructure. From his early days as an engineer to his current role as principal at Menlo Ventures, His journey is a testament to a power of curiosity, adaptability, and strategic thinking. In his stories he shared today and lessons on building high-performing teams, navigating difficult situations, and staying ahead of industry trends are so invaluable for anyone looking to make their mark in the tech world. And as we discuss, it's clear throughout our conversation that his passion for innovation, combined with his deep technical expertise and leadership skills, has made him a driving force in shaping the future of enterprise technology. So we're excited. We can't wait to see what groundbreaking startups and technologies that will help bring to life next. And to the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And don't forget to follow AI50 LinkedIn page, subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel for more engaging discussions about tech, venture, leaders, aging, products for the 50 plus demographic. Thank you for your attention.